Cela dit, la RSI ne constitue qu'un élément de la saine gestion des fonds propres. Les banques doivent rester vigilantes et continuer de faire preuve de prudence dans la gestion de leurs fonds propres, car la RSI ne saurait remplacer de bonnes pratiques de gestion du risque. Nous continuerons de suivre de près la conjoncture et de rajuster le taux de la RSI selon ce que dit les conditions. Je vous remercie de votre attention. Je passe maintenant la parole à Christine Casper.
Merci, Surintendant. Please note that the opening statement will be posted to OSFI's website in English and en français ce matin. A few notes before we start with questions. This event is for registered media only. One question and one follow-up, please. Une question et un suivi, s'il vous plaît. Also, we ask that you keep your questions to the scope of today's DSB announcement. And a reminder that OSFI officials cannot speak to the impact of today's announcement on specific institutions. Please raise your virtual hand using the Zoom reaction buttons at the bottom of your screen, and I will call on you to ask your questions. Veuillez lever votre main virtuelle en utilisant les boutons de réaction Zoom au bas de l'écran et je vous nommerai pour poser votre question. All right, we've got a question from Tim Colazzi. Please go ahead.
Hey there, can you hear me? Perfect.
Yes.
Hey, I was just wondering, so, it's pretty well explained kind of what you've been thinking. The one variable that I don't think was referred to was the fact that in the last, few weeks, we've had an interest rate cut. So obviously things have kind of changed on the economic front. It's debatable because you could say that, the cut was more about inflation coming down versus the economy itself. But was just wondering, how much you were weighing the fact that, releasing some capital could help stimulate the economy versus the trade-off of, watching and keeping a buffer for more risk.
And if I guess I'd respond a couple of ways to that, Tim. First, falling inflation is a really good thing overall for the financial system because it'll lessen the pace of cost of living increases, enable Canadians to continue to service their debts, all else. So it's a positive thing. Falling rates, 25 basis points off the overnight rate, although constructive, is not a game changer in terms of overall systemic stability. I think one of the reasons we have the buffer in place is so that regardless of monetary policy decisions made by the central bank, the financial system will operate smoothly or at least relatively resiliently through those changes in monetary policy.
All right, up next we have a question from Barbara Schechter. Barbara, please go ahead.
Hello. Excuse me. Hello. You've been pretty clear about the risks that you see out there in the marketplace and the economy. And there's been a lot of talk about the mortgages that are coming due. I just wanted to ask, because I think analysts were very much predicting that you were going to go to the top of the range last time, not this time, but last time. And I just wanted to ask you if there's a sense of wanting to, recognizing the risks are out there, but wanting to leave some wiggle room so that if there is something, a sudden sort of event or something, that you have room to maneuver. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So it's 0 to 4. We've gone to 3.5. The way we thought of setting the level of 3.5 last December, or stopping it, which is really what we did last December, is that in our look at the extent of vulnerabilities, high household debt, some elevated commercial real estate valuations, arguably did our stress testing, and in general, we found that a 3.5% buffer combined with capital conservatism we've seen at the banks, which they're all running north of 12%, produced an outcome and a view that 3.5 was enough insurance for that potential downturn. Very low likelihood, but not zero. We are preparing the system to absorb if it comes to pass. So I don't know if we are holding back an extra 50 just in case. It's more like we judge the vulnerabilities to be at a certain level. We think 3.5% plus discipline at the big six banks is what we need to provide is sufficient resilience for potential down.
Thank you. And my follow-up question would be a bit of a two-parter, because you give two-part answers sometimes. I'll give a two-part follow-up. The first part is that if there's something like a pandemic, you've already gone up to 4 in 2022, like you've already raised it. So just to sort of frame it in the, you've already given yourself room. Did you feel that, there was anything about, we didn't expect the pandemic? So if there was something like that you didn't want to look like you didn't expand it sort of far enough in the first instance. And the second part of the question is that the banks always exceed what you ask for anyway, what your predecessors have asked for. As long as I've been covering the banks, they always go over and above. So can you now not count on that they will have more of a reserve than you're looking for? So.
Yeah, great. First question. Pandemic, let that symbolize an unexpected economic shock that leads to market uncertainty and volatility. We want the DSB to be thick enough so if that shock occurs, people refer to the DSB and recognize, oh, there is ample capital to absorb the impact of that shock. And then as the shock metastasizes into actual risk events, in that case, we would lower the DSB, and its purpose is to absorb losses in that situation. In other words, if there was a shock like you described, we would expect banks' capital ratios in that situation to fall, and that would be an outcome consistent with a healthy, resilient banking system. So that's how we think about the DSB today, where things are, all things considered, there are a lot of vulnerabilities, but performance overall in the banking sector is pretty good. We'll have ample buffer for that difficult to predict shock. In terms of the behavior of bank boards and senior management teams, I think it is an advantage in Canada that we set in a principles-based fashion a buffer floor, and that boards and senior managers operate at above that buffer floor as an additional measure of prudence and conservatism. That's the strength of the system. I suppose in my prior answer, and in our prior communications, I'm reinforcing that strength as a reason to set the DSB buffer where it is at 3.5%.
Okay, thanks so much.
All right, just a reminder, if you want to ask a question, please raise your virtual hand using the Zoom reaction buttons at the bottom of your screen, and I will call on you. Veuillez lever votre main virtuelle en utilisant le bouton de réaction Zoom au bas de l'écran et je vous nommerai pour poser des questions. Nagrita, please go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, great. Good morning. So when you look at Q2 and compare it to Q1, you see that CET1 ratio has risen by about 10 basis points, and with more rate cuts expected. And my question is, at what point or will OSFI consider lowering DSB this year, or is it more of a wait and watch scene when the mortgage scenario eases next year?
I think there are two reasons why we would lower the DSB. The first is the aforementioned shock arrives, and we need to communicate to the market that now is the time for banks to use the buffer to absorb losses, and it's okay for capital ratios to fall. And the second reason would be if we saw the overall vulnerabilities in the system diminish, therefore producing lower stress losses in our analysis. So what would that look like? Well, if household debt income as one broad measure were to drop materially, that would produce lower stress losses, and then we would consider lowering our DSB. I would say there's no evidence on the horizon that vulnerabilities are less. They're holding stable, but there's no evidence that they're less. Those would be the two cases where we lower it.
All right, thank you.
Another piece up there in case somebody else has a question. Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions, so we'll conclude today's briefing. Si vous avez des questions supplémentaires, vous pouvez contacter les relations aux médias. If you have additional questions, please reach out to Osby's Media Relations. Merci, Superintendent, and thank you all very much for attending. Have a great day.
Thanks everyone for being here.